Hi again. Welcome to another episode of Ask the Lawyer. I'm Christine Haas with AskTheLawyer.com. And today we're talking about business and divorce, a hot topic. And today we have Kelli Hooper here of KBH Law out of Atlanta, Georgia area. Thank you so much for being with us, Kelli.
No problem.
So many people have questions when divorce comes up, and they have to wonder what happens if, in fact, I have a business as an asset in divorce. What are the most common types of businesses you see as assets in your divorce cases?
Oh, well, in my practice, I've seen all kinds of businesses. I represented a family that owned a funeral vault business at one point. I represented musicians and songwriters that obviously have royalty issues. I've represented NFL players who have sort of, not only salaries that are coming in, but sponsorships, that sort of thing. I think I've seen just about everything when it comes to business valuations and assets.
And there's something called a closely held business. How are those dealt with in divorce? And can you explain what a closely held business is, for example?
Sure. Well, I think first it's probably better to sort of, if you don't mind, start talking about how a business might even be included in a divorce. And so the way that we start the analysis is you start and look and see sort of when the business was created. If a business was created prior to marriage, then it is considered here in Georgia to be a separate asset of whomever owns the business. However, if a business is created during a marriage, then it's considered to be a marital asset. And so then analysis regarding how it's going to be split up starts with really determining ownership and determining when it was started. So let's say, for instance, in the question that you've given me, whether it's a closely held corporation, well, then you would look and see who are the owners of that corporation. Is it just one of the spouses? Does the spouse have partners? Is it an LLC? Is it an INC? There's lots that go into the analysis.
And I would imagine you probably deal with cases that come up where somebody is not necessarily the legal owner of the business, but they were part and worked on that business while they were married. What happens then?
Your analysis here in Georgia would start if you have an LLC or an INC, you need to start by looking at the operating agreement. So let's say someone comes in and they say, hey, I'm married to this guy. He has ownership in a corporation. Then I would need to see the operating agreement. I want to see how the corporation is set up. I want to see if it has shares, if there are partners, if there's a dissolution clause in there, if there's a clause that speaks to how owners may be able to distribute their ownership if something happens. That's where the analysis would start. Honestly, most cases involving complex corporations, I would usually hire a business valuation expert to assist me with determining not only the corporate structure, but also what could be determined as the value of the asset. So then we can start working towards how we're going to break that up during the marriage.
That brings me to my next question, too. You hit on that. Business valuations and divorce, are they similar to appraisals or valuations in different types of industries, or are they same?
Well, sort of. um, the way that so if you were to, let's say, appraise a piece of property, what you do is you of course take that piece of property, you find out, you get three comparable businesses, or comparable pieces of real estate in the same area, and you determine how closely yours is to the others and come up with a valuation, right? Simple stuff. For businesses, most people have something unique that makes it so that they have a profitable business, right? And all businesses are not the same. So your ability to find comps is very different than finding comps for a house. It's not so hard to find a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in Vinings, but it may be difficult to find a car dealership that's minority owned with 250 employees and X number of assets.
Right.
You follow me?
Yes.
So the things that you use to determine the valuation are not similar to what you'd use to find valuation for a piece of real estate because it's more complicated. By nature of the business being successful, it's going to be unique.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So some preventative medicine, so to speak, from your vantage point, if somebody's engaged, what advice would you give to them as they're preparing for marriage if in fact they already have a business?
Get a prenup. Automatically, even if you think that your business isn't worth anything, the whole point of getting a prenuptial agreement is to almost take a snapshot, if you will, of the financial standing of each of the parties. So in the event, God forbid, that there's a divorce, then you would know on the date of marriage how much each of those assets are worth. That becomes valuable because when we start talking about whether or not a business is a marital asset, you need to know whether there's been contributions from both parties in the asset and whether it's been converted to a marital asset. So let's say, for instance, just to give you an example, let's say you have a woman who's a doctor who's getting married to a guy who owns his own business. The lady who's a doctor has her own practice, and the man who owns his own business, let's say he runs a car dealership. Well, in that particular instance, her practice is her practice, and we should be able to calculate a valuation for that, and that's disclosed on the prenup. The car dealership would then be disclosed as, however much it's worth and however that ownership is. And then moving forward, let's say wife and husband, she becomes, a financial contributor to the car dealership. She's making a loan. Maybe she made some sort of loan. He bought new cars. He sold those cars. Well, there's an argument now that this car dealership is now a marital asset, right? And so then moving forward, if you haven't handled that in the prenup, then let's say, God forbid, there's a divorce later on, you would use the value prior to the marriage and the current value to determine how much the wife might be entitled to in a divorce proceeding.
Such good advice going in, and certainly something to be smart about. I'm sure you see this happening every day and people saying, I wish I would have done that long ago, right?
Yeah. And, it comes up a lot for entertainers. We have a lot of, songwriters, producers, artists that live here in Atlanta. And one thing that they often don't consider is how to protect those assets or how to handle royalties in the event of a divorce. There's a whole, it's a whole nother practice area to talk about works that were created during a marriage and whether or not, in the event of a divorce, whether or not the other spouse is entitled to some portion of the royalties. Right. So if you have that sort of situation, I would encourage you to talk with an attorney who's familiar with that area of law, because it's a specialized area of law and could really be very lucrative for your family if you handle it the right way.
Such great advice. Thank you so much for your time today. Kelli Hooper of KBH Law outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you.
No problem.
And this has been another episode of Ask the Lawyer. I'm Christine Haas. So glad that you could join us today for this advice. Make sure to subscribe, hit that subscribe button for us, and follow us on Facebook. Until next time, we'll see you then.